So hi everyone, thank you so much for showing up to Community Conversations in our last and special session with Andrea Nguyen, girl boss, chef, teacher, author, and we're so excited that you're here joining us on a Saturday and can't wait to see where the conversation goes. So before we start, just some housekeeping rules. So the recording is there is going to be recording. So if you are uncomfortable, just let us know via private DM and we can provide accommodations. But if you're uncomfortable, you can also just turn off your camera and that'll be fine as well. So before we start, Empowered Punu acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credits, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and that Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people.
Okay, great. For today's agenda, we're going to do a little introduction for ourselves and Andrea. Andrea will speak and we'll be asking questions throughout her session. So feel free to type in the chat if any questions or comments come up. We'll sort of interject and read them up for Andrea. We'll have a little section to open up for any additional Q&A. And at the end, we'll do a little photo and wrap up. Okay.
So just a little bit about us. We are Empowered Punu, and we are an arts-based collective of young, first and second generation Vietnamese Canadian diasporic women. This was established in 2018, and EPN Collective dreams of creating a space where Vietnamese women and non-binary folks can share their stories and reclaim their intersectional cultural identities through the arts.
So Community Conversations has been a 3-part virtual speaker series featuring thoughtful panel discussions with culinary leaders, professionals, artists, and we've been digging into food's connection with culture, identity, memories, and community. This is our last installment of Community Conversations, and we're so excited to have Andrea here today. All right, so introducing Andrea. So she is a culinary bridge builder and leading authority on Asian food. Andrea was born in Vietnam and came to the United States at the age of 6 as a refugee. She holds a master's degree from the USC Annenberg School of Communication and Journalism. Andrea has written articles and developed recipes for Food and Wine, EatingWell, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Los Angeles Times. Ooh, the list keeps going. Her vegetable-driven cookbook, Evergreen Vietnamese, publishes very soon. Andrea currently lives in Santa Cruz, California, where she does most of her writing, teaching, and podcasting. So introducing Andrea.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today on a Saturday. And I know that it's springtime where y'all are and we're getting warm and kind of interested in cooking some more. And I think Vietnamese foods are the ticket, right?
Yes.
Cool.
Sorry.
Y'all have to know, like, I can talk forever about food because it's so exciting for me. And while we were gathering in the green room for this presentation, I want to, just number one, tell everyone in this session how important it is for me as a writer to be at this part of my strange career, which I did not know I would ever have, in food writing, that I, number one, would still be writing cookbooks. Number two, be able to now speak to an Asian American audience, a non-binary audience, people who are interested in really deep, authentic food experiences. Because when I first started out wanting to write about food, I pitched my first cookbook ideas, and it was called Pass the Fish Sauce. Okay, I thought, oh, that's so cute. Everybody loves fish sauce. Everybody loves nước mắm, right? And so I thought, I'm just gonna throw it out there and just say, just pass the fish sauce as you're passing one idea to another. Like we pass the fish sauce around at our table when what do? We're eating gum. And my publisher, and it took me a long time to get that book deal, but when I got the book deal, my publisher was like, fish sauce is still kind of like a scary ingredient, and it just made me be too strong of a title. So when my first book published, Into the Vietnamese Kitchen, it published as Into the Vietnamese Kitchen, not as Pass the Fish Sauce. And when I would go to do book talks, there were very, very few Vietnamese people in the audience. I got a lot of white people, a few Vietnam veterans, and on occasion, I would have conversations with people who had served during the war and who had either positive or negative interactions with Vietnamese food. And I would go and do demonstrations or teach cooking classes, and I would be like, oh, everybody, let's just like taste some nước mắm, you know, because I was like, nước mắm like rules. If there are like two ingredients that you say, Andrea, you can have like on a desert island, I would say, give me nước mắm and cơm, you know, nước mắm and gạo. Because with those two ingredients, I can do anything because I can forage, because Vietnamese people were supposed to be scrappy. But if we have rice and fish sauce, we're good to go. Anyway, so I would like do like these nước mắm tastings at book talks. And I would have to like set out cucumber slices for people to like dip the cucumber in and, you know, taste the nước mắm. Meanwhile, during the early 2000s, people were like doing tastings of olive oil. And, you know, you would like have olive oil in a little cup, and then you just like do a shot of it. And so many people have compared olive oil to nước mắm, like first grade, you know, first pressing nước mắm and stuff in olive oil, but you would never, ever like taste nước mắm that way. It was always like this cautionary thing. And, you know, in Vietnamese, there is that phrase, like when you don't know how to eat something, or if you don't drink, or if you don't like to eat something, or if you don't drink alcohol, you would say, không biết ăn, or không biết uống, meaning I don't eat, you know, không biết ăn mắm tôm. I don't know how to eat shrimp paste or shrimp sauce. And it's like, it's not like you don't know how to eat it, you just don't like it. Similarly, you would say, không biết uống rượu. It's like, I don't know how to drink liquor. That's what my mother says. But then, you know, she's like pouring rum on her flan all the time. So the thing is that she just doesn't like alcohol. But there was always like that stigma of like, you know, we don't know how to eat something. And also this fear of foreignness, of like, oh God, the foreigner won't like my food. And so in my trajectory of writing and representing Asian food and Vietnamese food, I've always like taken small steps. And the reason why I chose this career and broke out of my very more traditional career of being a bank examiner, because I studied finance, first generation, or you can call me 1.5 because I came here when I was 6 years old. The whole idea was that you need financial stability. And so I studied finance, and turned out I suck at accounting. I just like am so bad at it. You know, and all this stuff that's happening in banking right now, in finance, I dealt with that a little bit in the early 1990s after I graduated from college. And it was just like so yucky, and I just didn't like it. And I was looking for a back door. I got a back door by getting a fellowship to go study overseas. And when I was hanging out in Hong Kong for a year on a fellowship, and I was studying Mandarin Chinese, I was just like, I got to do something with food. And I'm the youngest in my family of 5. And so my parents were just kind of like letting me do my thing. So I got away with going home to California and getting a job at a restaurant owned by women, 2 American women who were willing to take chances on other women who had no professional experience in cooking. And Mary Sue Feniger and Susan Milliken hired me to cook for them on the line. I'd never been in a kitchen, you know, in a professional kitchen before, but I did it. It was really hard work, but I would still go home and cook, and I would still go home and read cookbooks. And I've been reading cookbooks since I was 10 years old, because my parents couldn't afford to buy like books from, you know, the bookmobile, or and we were just like curious about food, because food informed us about culture and about America, about, Europe, because we were fascinated by all the butter and sugar and white flour that was so expensive in Vietnam. Like, if you were born abroad, you need to ask like your parents about what it was like in Vietnam. Those ingredients were like really precious. Here we're like, oh, who wants to eat white sugar now? It's so bad for you. But it's like in Vietnam, it was like, oh, you want to make caramel sauce, nước màu, to make caw, you need to find some really good sugar and finesse that, because otherwise your caramel sauce is going to turn out poorly. But anyway, so we came to the States and we're all of a sudden able to get white sugar. We were able to bake eclairs and sponge cakes, and just all these things. And my family took full advantage of that. We're a family of 7. We were refugees. We couldn't eat out that much. We cooked at home. And part of that was making a lot of Vietnamese food. And my father, who passed away recently, looked at all of us and he said, you speak Vietnamese at home. You go outside, you learn English. But all of you have to speak one more language, because this allowed us to communicate with other people. And I share all of this with you because I think that all of you are into communication and into presenting a lot of, what Vivi said, and also is presented in the Empower mission, which is like to represent intersectionality, which is where we are now. And we're all living in a space that is hybridized, and where you are crossing with a lot of different cultures. And so if we can communicate with each other and make those connections through food, which is so easy for people to honestly digest, right? It gives us a better way to realize that we're all human. So, so that's how I got into food, and that's why I stay in it. But along the way, I've been lucky enough to kind of trace the arc of Vietnamese food, and I collect a lot of cookbooks. So right behind me is just like maybe, I don't know, like a quarter of my cookbook collection. These are 6 foot, 7 foot tall bookshelves. And I have books in mostly in English, but there are Vietnamese cookbooks. There are some cookbooks in Chinese and Japanese and Spanish. I don't speak all those language very well, but like some of them are bilingual too. That helps a lot. But anyway, so like when my mother came here to the United States, she had this little orange notebook that she had written her recipes down in. And she filled that recipe book with recipes for like brownies and spaghetti, things that we had like discovered in America, but also like her bánh pâté chaud recipe that she then developed and perfected in America. But she also would share recipes with other women in her community. My mom's 88 now. So when she came to the United States in 1975, she was like in her she was like in her early 40s. So she would get on the phone on the weekends when the rates were cheap and talk to her lady friends, and they would exchange ideas. And then there were like these bootleg copies of Vietnamese cookbooks that circulated within the community in 3-ring binders. So no digital stuff, you guys. There were like these 3-ring binders. And one of the books was called La Bếp Giỏi. And it was written by a woman named Bà Vân Đài. And it was written in the 1940s. And my mom remembers it from when she was young in North Vietnam. And so like I wanted like hardbound copies of it. And I eventually now have 3 copies. And this is a copy, it's the equivalent of The Joy of Cooking in Vietnam. And you have to read some Vietnamese and stuff, but I'm showing this to you. It's like, this is the first copy that I owned, and it was like a bootleg copy that I purchased in like Little Saigon in one of the bookstores. And then I went to Vietnam, and whenever I go to Vietnam, I go to bookstores and I look in their cookbook section. And so I was able to pick up this copy. which is more recent, and they don't date things in Vietnam very much. But finally, I got a photo of Mrs. Van Dai. And it was like so cool because I never knew what she looked like before, right? I was like, oh my gosh, she's like a woman who wrote, like, the recipes are not very long, y'all. I mean, like, this is it, you know, like pho is boiled down to like maybe, I don't know, like 100 words at the most. But then my friends who were traveling in Vietnam, they got me this, which is like a really like old copy of the book. And for those of you who are in like graphic design and stuff, check out the typeface used. This is like old school Vietnamese typefaces. They are so hip and beautiful. And it's the same book, but it's like lasted all these years. And these are the pages, you know, they're like totally worn. And someone has even like left a little note in here. I don't know. I hope sometimes, you know, my books are going to circulate long after I'm dead and someone leaves a note in one of my books. But, you know, I have like books like that and I read from them and it gives me like great joy because I'm thinking about my identity and I think about how do I communicate that to modern people? How does that inform me in the kitchen? And then I'm going to now show you some other books because I know that you're like an arts organization. So this is Làm Bếp Khéo. I mean, check that out, y'all. I mean, like, that's just like totally rad, right? Who would like design a book cover like that nowadays? Here is a book about vegetarian cooking. And if you like see this, it's like really, you know, like old school, very of the time, of the moment. And then also this. Yes, typography, Anna. And the books were covered in customized plastic book covers sewn by my mother, who covers everything because she doesn't want to soil anything. So she sews like her own things. So now I want you to also see this. So this is, I mean, she looks serious, right? And my French is kind of rustic. After I left Vietnam, I was like, you know, the colonial thing, I need to learn English. But she's like, she's got a look to her. And so this is published in the 1970s, I believe, and 1988, sorry. And it's pretty darn cool.
But Andrea, we actually
yes.
have a quick question for you.
Yes.
A participant asked, what's the most impactful cookbook you've read? I know you have a lot, but if you could pick one on the top of your head.
Well, in English, it's a book called The Key to Chinese Cooking by a woman named Irene Kuo. It was published in the 1980s. And she was a restaurateur and chef in New York City who passed away. She had a way of like writing instructions that gave me a lot of inspiration for how to write recipes and get people to like see things. For example, swiftly stir fry that. And then you're like, okay, got to do it fast. But I mean, instead of just saying, you know, do it fast, but it's like to really kind of motivate people to read and write and cook in a particular way. So yeah, but also Mrs. Van Dai with Làm Bếp Dai in Vietnamese, she inspired me because she assumed that everyone like had a sense of what the food is like. And so I actually still cook from her recipes. They're a little weird, you know, because you're like cooking like nearly like 80 years ago. But I know enough about cooking and can kind of intuit what her sensibilities are like. So what she writes about informs me about what the canon of Vietnamese food was like back in the 40s. A lot of that has changed. So I can use her book and then trace it with like more recent publications in Vietnam like this. So, you know, this is a whole book on Gia Gia from like the 3 regions. I mean, you know, so there's like all of this stuff going on. And so for me, as I suppose like a translator of cuisines for people, I try to figure out what is going to be the most relevant to cooks who know Vietnamese food and cooks who are unfamiliar and trying to figure it out. So it's always a balancing act. And so when it comes to food and identity, and for people who are looking at my books, and I'm assuming that the people here in this room are of Vietnamese heritage, you know, there are recipes online, I'm going to tell you that. And as my mother says, she's 88 and she's on YouTube and she reads Vietnamese and all that, but she says it's different and I agree with her, not just because she champions my work, but she says that the things that are in a book, especially in my books, have been tested and rigorously like presented, because for me, books are permanent. I can't, you know, I let them go. I kiss them goodbye before, you know, I say to my publisher, okay, send it away and go to print, because I know that's like my last look, and otherwise the recipes are in your hands. So I take that responsibility of being in people's kitchens in book form, and the fact that people have purchased my books, that's a huge responsibility for me, because it's like, if I'm going to give you, it's like giving road directions, right? And like, people are going to go and they're going to drive. And like, if they make a wrong turn, they don't get to your house. And they're really mad. And nowadays they let you know, unlike social media. And it's unpleasant. So I do my best to test recipes, and in Evergreen Vietnamese, I do my best to give people a lot of swaps and substitutes and room to wiggle and create. And I've been writing cookbooks for like 20 years. And this is my 7th book. And I have to say it's my most creative book, because a lot of it is anchored in Vietnamese food and cooking, which is heavily plant-based, is plant dominant. You know, if you look at even like pho, there's meat in there, yeah, but what anchors the flavors of pho are like the spices, the charred shallot or onion and ginger, and all of these other things that you can come bring into play. Those things define the flavor of pho, even down to the sugar or the MSG. That's all like plant-based stuff, all right? The meat just happens to be there to provide umami. And so when you think about that, you're like, oh wow, so much of our food, so much of Vietnamese food is grounded in what we harvest from the land and from the sea. And so that's why I went forth with that mission to write Evergreen Vietnamese, because it's really rooted in the philosophy of Vietnamese cooking. And it's like, you're all young, but I'm 54 years old. And you get to a certain point in life that you really think about what you eat and what you put in your body. And I am such a chicken for pain. I am trying to really look forward to having the least painful aging process as possible. So I want to be healthy. I'm just going to tell you that. And I had some health scares when I turned 50, and I changed my diet to a plant dominant diet. And I can't tell you how much happier I am. And even for people in my family, someone like my mother, who was always like skeptical about vegetarian food, she is now like saying to me, oh yeah, well, let's just have more vegetables. And some of the recipes in the book go back to dishes that my mom prepared for my dad and me after all my siblings were gone. And we would have like these very simple, like plant-rich meals. And I thought, oh God, this is like poor people's food. Why are they feeding me this stuff? But I was like a teenager, right? And I was like, God, but it was like really good at the same time. And I remind her of that nowadays. She goes, oh yeah, that was like a really good dish. But those are all the foods that they thought of eating once they got like my siblings out of the house. And then they just had me to just like, oh, we can feed her anything. She'll eat whatever. And I think about those times with them, because those are the dishes that meant a lot to them. So there's like this A couple of things in the book, like this eggplant recipe, that's a vegetarian version of that, of an eggplant which is a style of simmering or stewing dishes with garlic and tito shiso and fermented shrimp sauce, mam tong. But I have like a vegan option for that, or you can use fish sauce. And so like I made that for her. And she was like, oh, I haven't had this in a long time. And I was like, haha, it's like my new version. And that's the other reason why I'm saying haha, is that I want you to understand that in the spectrum of Vietnamese food, we're always evolving. But what's important is that we understand the roots of where we come from. So I will explain in my recipes and in my writing where a recipe started, what I've done to it to modernize it, or maybe there's a hack, and then how you can plug in to make it your own. So in that dish, you know, there are like vegan options, and then it's like I don't make it the way my mother does, but it's still delicious, and it's still finished with a raw garlic and a bunch of tito Vietnamese shiso. And then like I've talked to, like the cover of the book is bánh cuốn, but it's like this really cool hack that I'm using to like make it super duper easy. And when I showed it to her and served the bánh cuốn to her, she was like, in Vietnamese, she goes, game changer. I'm doing that. And I was like, man, please, you know. She's like, I can't believe it. Now I don't have to make like all the bánh cuốn and the skillets for your nieces and nephews. And so, I mean, like, she's still like so excited about food and cooking. And I think that it's the way for us all to engage and have conversations with our families. And so, you know, when you're cooking from my books, from my recipes, try them out and then go to your families and say things like, this is what Andrea Nguyen says to do. What do you think? And then that'll like get people roused up, because you know how Vietnamese people are like always really competitive. Well, I say to people, you know, go and tell your family, and then they'll be like, oh, Andrea Nguyen's wrong, or she's got one good idea, but here's a better way of doing it. And then that's how you can extract recipes from your families, because otherwise they may not give it to you.
I love that. In a way, you're like a food historian, the way you've documented, you know, the core recipes from many, many years ago, and you're evolving and changing it up, and then also encouraging other people to discover new ways. So that's amazing.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think that I'm very lucky to have this career. And nowadays I feel so lucky that there are folks of your generation interested in food and interested in amplifying the work of others in non-conventional professions, to tell you the truth. And when I started out, there weren't that many other Asian Americans in food, and not that many Asian folks who would like attend my events or were interested. And this time around with Evergreen Vietnamese, Vietnamese folks have come out in support of the book. And I'm like so incredibly thankful to like all the cool chefs that I'm working with, especially the women chefs. Just like, dang, you know, I mean, like there are chefs now working in food who are not doing it because their parents, because they had to, because like their parents had to open up restaurants, and perhaps these chefs' parents, families never even had a restaurant, but they decided to go into the culinary profession, which is like really hard and full of financial risk, and they're having great success. And so if I can facilitate that in any way, I'm like more than happy. Because like as a writer, as a cooking teacher, like I find my job to be so joyful, and I've been long waiting to hear from other Vietnamese voices. And so it's like, all right, let's all be part of the mix, you know?
Thank you so much, Andrea. We actually have a few questions from the audience. And the first one is, what's the most challenging dish that you've had to develop?
Oh my goodness. Well, a in the current book, in the new book, Evergreen Vietnamese, there are 3 dishes that I think of. So the first one is a vegan nuoc mam. And so you're like, yeah, vegan nuoc mam, weird. Because it's like, nuoc mam is fish sauce. How can you have fish sauce without fish? You can. And there are, you can buy them. And the best ones come from Vietnam, but they also have preservatives in them. And they're only sold at like a handful, like really hardcore Vietnamese markets. And so I went to develop my own recipe, and it's in the book, and it's like a 1-to-1 replacement for regular nuoc mam. And that was really hard because I didn't know like if I could do it, but I knew that if I could, that it would be so great for cooks to understand how you build umami, how you build the notes of dum da in Vietnam's signature condiment. And then moving on from there, because if I got nuoc mam, I was like, all right, I can write this like evergreen Vietnamese cookbook if I can like deal with nuoc mam. So I'm like, check. So then the other thing I had to also check off was how to make ya lo, jia lo. I was like, how, can I do this? And I tried like Impossible Meat and Beyond Beef and stuff. I thought, okay, can I whirl that up? Because that would be like so easy. They promised to be like ground beef. No, it was so disgusting. It didn't stick together like a paste and all that. So I ended up spending about, I don't know, a month, maybe 2, figuring out how to make that from readily available ingredients that are tofu based. And my husband, who's white, but we've been together for like 30 plus years, he was like, not good enough. I think you can do better. So, I mean, you don't have to be Vietnamese to know what Vietnamese food tastes like or what good Vietnamese food tastes like. But he was like pushing me until I got to the recipe that I wanted. And that's in the book. The third recipe that I had a lot of problems with, it was a cake. It's the mocha cake in the book. And it's a really simple recipe. But when you get there, that recipe is simple because I had to like go so many rounds with it. It's because I wanted a cake that tasted like Vietnamese coffee, not a coffee cake, but a Vietnamese coffee tasting cake. And I wanted it to be easy. And I wanted it to have like this whipped cream that kind of tasted it like too. And so that was at least 30 rounds. And some people have baked it. I mean, it was all my stuff's recipe tested. So I was happy that my testers loved the recipe, and one of the testers was the pastry chef. But then like the book's gone out into the wild, and like there was a woman just hopped on it and made the cake, and it looks beautiful and it's delicious. So so those are the 3 recipes that I really like have been recently challenged. There's always a challenge, but once you get over it, and then it's out in the world, it's out in the wild, you're just like, all right, on to the next one. So
thanks so much, Andrea. These sound amazing, and we can't wait to look into your book and actually try them. We have another audience question, and it's that you've mentioned that you've had some health scares and that healthy eating is important to you. Can you speak to how you've been able to balance healthy eating with preserving the authenticity or traditionalism of Asian/Vietnamese food?
So turns out like it's a lot easier than I thought. The problem is that when people leave their home country and they come to America, this is like the land of milk and honey. It's the land of meat. It's a land of affordable meat. And so when I began cutting back on eating animal protein, I just suddenly felt a lot better. I had like these digestive issues. I had like this strange like bulge in my lower abdomen that it was so uncomfortable. And it was from years of stress, years of eating because I had to for my profession, of mixing weird things together. So anyway, so I was like cutting back on meat. What I realized was, as I mentioned before, is like traditional Vietnamese food and Asian food is extremely agrarian based because we are agrarian cultures and societies. So what we eat is very much rooted in what we grow. And so if you think about that, it was like so easy to cut back. I'm not a total vegetarian. I'm going to eat low meat. So I'm going to combine meat and a lot of vegetables. That's why I call it like a plant dominant diet. But so when I felt better, and I realized that I was returning to my true Vietnamese food roots, I went to my mom and I said, "Man, look, you know, I've had like this discovery that like healthy living, can be really like be done with a lot of plants." And she looked at me and she was like, "That's how we ate in," well, first she said, "I'm so glad that you look like you're refreshed and have more energy now. You don't feel so bad. You're not so grumpy. But that's how we ate in Vietnam." And I was like, "Seriously?" She said, "Yes." So like, she would, for a stir fry, she would send our cook to the wet market to purchase 300 grams of animal protein. That's at roughly 10 ounces for you in Canada. You can do the conversions really easily, So 300 grams for a family of 7. She wanted to make gun for a family of 7, 100 grams of protein. And so when you think about that, you're like, my God, that's like a starvation diet. No, she said that was like just like how they ate and how people ate in Vietnam, where seafood was more affordable than chicken, beef, or pork. So it's not as difficult as it seems. But when you go to an Asian restaurant, there's a lot of meat. Even like when I go to get things that are wrapped in lettuce and herbs, I'm like, can I get more lettuce and herbs? I've got all this meat, I've got all this protein, but where can I get the green stuff? And so, yeah, it's not so difficult. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. So the next question is from Gail, and it is a little bit more specific. She says that I have most of your books and plan to buy your new one. I am not vegetarian and really like Nuc Mam. I have the 64-ounce bottle of Red Boat in my fridge. Shout out to Red Boat. Can I get Nuc Mam? Can I use Nuc Mam in place of any vegetarian replacements you use in the recipes?
Hell yes, Gail. In fact, the ingredient lines say 1.5 tablespoons fish sauce, purchased or vegan. And so like this is the book, and you'll see the ingredient lines say that. So one tablespoon fish sauce, store-bought or vegan version, and you can totally use regular fish sauce and like go to town. This is a vegetarian friendly book, and I wrote it for myself and others, and I go both ways. So go for it.
Amazing. And next one is, you mentioned that books are permanent. Are there books outside of cooking/food space that are important to you or have shaped the way you engage in your work?
Yes. So I read a lot of novels. And so, I read novels because they inspire how I shape my words. And if you writing recipes can get kind of dull because recipes are like instruction manuals. There are only so many ways you can describe food and taste and touch cues and stuff. And finally, in this book, in Evergreen Vietnamese, you'll see me play with my verbiage a lot more. So, so for example, at the bottom of, and I learned to do this by reading a lot of different kinds of literature and newspapers. I subscribe to newspapers and magazines. And so like I changed my verbiage. In the past, like there would be at the end of my recipes, there's always a section called notes, and I would just like write, extra tips for people. But this time the notes are organized into like 4 or 5 different categories. And so like in the past, I would have said storage, here's a storage tip. And then I would list like how long you can freeze something. Now that's just called like lifespan. Or because it's like, I thought about it, I'm like, how can I just like tell people, what do they want to know? They want to know about the lifespan of a dish, or like make ahead tips is what, sometimes like people want cues as to how far advanced they can prep something. So I labeled those tips, I categorize them as like timing. And just so that, it's like, so that as you're going through the recipes, you get a sense of an organization and how my brain organizes. But like one of the books that I have really enjoyed lately is George Saunders' A Swim in the Pond on a Rainy Night or something like that. George Saunders is a short story writer. And it's a strange book. It's a book about reading and writing. It's a book about how you become a better reader and a better writer. But it's also a book about being honest, being true to yourself and how you communicate. And I think that there are a lot of takeaways for any of us, whether we're writing creatively or not. But his is a work that I have been inspired by a lot recently. I'm also inspired by writers such as Viet Nguyen and Quay Mai, the novelist, Nguyen Phan Quay Mai, who has written 2 novels now that are just really wonderful. And she actually inspired a popsicle recipe in the book, because I read in her first novel about this popsicle shop in Hanoi. And I was like, it was so beautifully written. And I thought, oh God, I need to make something that evokes that experience. So, it's like, so for me at this stage in my career, I'm playing with a lot more ideas and bringing literature and culture more into my recipes. Oh, okay. So Viet Thanh is, spelled like VITTHANH and then Nguyen. But Quay Mai, this is her book, and this is how she you spell her name. And she is an author who was born and raised in Hanoi. And she writes these historical novels. She's like in her late 40s, early 50s. And the stuff that she has in The Mountain Sing is historically, she researched that. And there's like stuff in there that it's kind of eye-opening as to what people experienced during the 50s, 60s, and post 75.
Thanks, Andrea. Thank you for the little book tour. It's just so nice to see, you know, it's so candid. The next question is that you've mentioned that you pondered how to communicate your identity to others through your food and cooking. Can you speak to how your identity is projected in your work, both culturally and personally?
Sure. So when I started out writing about food, I had this sense that number one, the cookbooks that were in existence were written by people who were older than me and who were not representing the Vietnamese American experience. So I went to college in the 80s. I worked at a university in the 90s. I was very much aware of um, the Asian American Pacific Islander experience, that intersectionality, what we call that now. I was very much aware of that, but like it wasn't like a thing that in food. In food, people always thought of like, oh, Vietnam, so exotic. I must travel there. And oh, the women, they're so beautiful. They all have long hair. They, wear conical hats, and they're so like lithe and skinny and wearing áo. I'm none of that, okay? And so I thought, I'm an American. I lived here most of my life, and I wanted to present the story and the recipes of people who came to America, the diasporic communities, and how they held on to their identity and shaped their identities through food. And that was something that was at the center of my experience growing up, because my parents, we didn't have anything much else aside from other Vietnamese refugee immigrants and our food to, identify ourselves with. And so in eating and cooking Vietnamese food, we were able to feel comfortable about being Vietnamese in America, but also being Vietnamese American. And so I've long always presented food as being something that is trans-Pacific Asian food, meaning that it's from the motherland and it comes over here to America or it goes somewhere else. And it is fluid and it is transnational, crossing borders, because that's really our experience. We're not fixed. And so sometimes that seems so troubling to people because, if you're like watching a lot of Anthony Bourdain shows from the past, it's like, oh, he goes over there and he talks to Vietnamese people over there. And I want the banh mi that was made in Hoi An. Well, the banh mi in Hoi An, it cannot be created in America because it's very specific to that experience. And there is plenty of good banh mi in Vietnam. And you can like craft your own flavors too, but you need to understand, and respect the traditions of what the food is all about. So I'm always kind of arguing for people to take a look at what's around them and who's making the food and how can they learn from them. And so I take my personal experience as a Vietnamese American, project that through my recipes, and also now as I've grown as a writer, include the ideas from other Vietnamese American food people, and so that we can see this much more complex and actually delicious food experience.
Just to segue off that, thank you, Andrea. Talking about other Vietnamese chefs, Jay Tran, one of our other community conversation speakers and another culinary powerhouse and woman boss, is also on the call and is wondering what your game-changing bun cuong hack is and whether it's in the new book.
Oh, totally, Jay. So like, it's the cover, my friend. That's it. Oh, well, here. And it's just like really cool. I have like this, and if you need an assist, there are, I made these videos of like the hacks for some of the recipes, because sometimes people just like they don't want to read that, or they need to see something in addition to read stuff. So that's on my website, and the link is pointed to in the cookbook. So there are other hacks in the book, like oven fried jiaza. It's like my new thing, because like anybody who's made jiaza knows like it is so hard. It's like playing roulette. We all want to gamble, but a lot of times it doesn't work out. And so, and I've had a lot of, experience with like bubbly, yucky, exploding jiaza. So if you oven fry it, it's healthy, it's easier. It's like, the introductory level jiaza, and it's just absolutely delicious. So there are a lot of hacks in the book that I'm very excited about. And this time I'm just like, they're hacks, y'all, like you don't have to cook the way that your mother does. Even my mother doesn't cook the way she used to.
Thanks so much, Andrea. Just wrapping up our talk, we really wish we could talk forever, but we know that you're very busy and have other things. So tying into EPN's mission to allow for a really creative space for women and women identifying Vietnamese leaders, how do you feel that your gender identity has played into your role as a culinary professional, especially within the Vietnamese environment?
Right. That's a good question. There are like, there are a lot of women who are strong and they're in the kitchen, but they don't come out of the kitchen. Shall I say that? And you see that in home kitchens. The mother, the grandma is doing the cooking, but the father, the uncle is like talking about the food oftentimes. But I think that that I learned this from my mother. She stays in the kitchen. She looks like the perfect Vietnamese woman with like her hair done up and made up all and stuff. But if someone asks her a question about food, she's like right on it. And I think that that for me, like, I don't necessarily need to be asked as much, I just talk. And so I try to break gender barriers that way. I'll talk to anybody about food, okay? But recently I did a research project about Vietnamese people in New Orleans, about the Vietnamese Cajun experience. And I went down there and I like ended up interviewing this woman who's in like her early 70s. She's the matriarch behind a very successful seafood chain in New Orleans, and she's Vietnamese. No one had ever talked to her in Vietnamese before. And guess what? She had a lot to say. And she was the powerhouse behind that operation. And even her son said, "Oh yeah, well I'm just, you know, her mouthpiece kind of thing." But it's like I feel like there's Vietnamese women are so strong, but yet sometimes the traditional role of a Vietnamese woman is to be beautiful and to be the hospitality person, but at the same time they're known to be strong, but they don't quite show it. And there's like it's almost like a sneaky quality. I'm not that sneaky because I'm not, you know, the ideal embodiment of a Vietnamese woman. Like when I go to Vietnam, they don't think this is Vietnamese. They're like, "Oh, you laugh too much. Your hair is short. You're big. You must be Chinese or Korean." You know, it's like, so I'm just like, whatever. Here's my passport. I was born in Vietnam.
Yeah, you should show them. Last question, or I guess the last thing that we wanted to wrap up with is what else are you working on? Evergreen is coming out very soon. How are you promoting it, and how can people find it?
Oh, well, Evergreen Vietnamese is sold wherever you find books. And so, you know, if you've got an indie bookshop, check it out there. You can buy it online. My book events are listed in my Instagram and also on my website, vietwellkitchen.com/events. There's a lot of stuff coming up. If you pre-order the book anywhere, there are these cool pre-order bonuses that we're doing. And you can go to my webpage, to the events page, and scroll on down and enter your information in. And that means you'll get like this really cool bonus content package. It's like a PDF. And also you'll get a link to join me for a virtual Zoom cooking class in the middle of May. And like you can come however, in your pajamas if you want, whatever time zone. We're gonna have a cook along, and it's gonna be really fun. So, and my events are unfortunately in the United States, and because it's very expensive to tour, and I'm doing like these 3 dinners in New York City with they're not all 3, 2 dinners and a pop-up with 3 amazing, amazing Vietnamese women chefs that I'm so excited about. And those are coming up in early May, the 7th, 8th, and 9th. So if you're in New York City, join me.
Yay. And I just wanted to read out, highlight this comment from Joseph, who is actually part of the community and owns some Vietnamese food, street food and cafe. And I'll just pop the address in here for the rest of the audience. But he said that we're partnering up with Type in the Junction in Toronto to carry Evergreen for Asian Heritage Month.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Joseph. Wow.
Thank
We
you
love
so
to see
much,
the community
Andrea.
coming together.
Like I was joking around earlier in the green room. It's like, you know, Vietnamese people, like we're just like so like some oftentimes disorganized, and it's your generation that's like organizing us and like using Zoom and bringing people together. And I can't thank you enough for doing this and being so professional about it, and whipping me in line, all that stuff. Because, you know, I'm busy and trying to hold it together, and you help me do that, and I can't tell you how appreciative I am. And this is like my first book event, to tell you the truth, and you guys are first.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate and are honored to be the first. If you're ever in Toronto, we would happy to host you and show you the Vietnamese food that's in our area.
I'd love that.
Yes. Thank you so much to everyone who's attended. We're going to try to do a quick group photo. So if you'd like to turn your cameras on, we're going to do that. right. Vivi, are you going to take it? Got it? Okay, everyone smile.
Yes, give me 1 second. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Perfect. And Joseph in the kitchen, how fitting.
He's ready to go. Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone. Please follow Andrea on her socials, Empowered for New on our socials. We'll look forward to sharing more events with you in the future. We also have a book coming out as well for our most recent art project. So keep an eye on that. It's our anthology launch. So save the date, Sunday, May 28th.
Also wanted to just give a quick shout out to Jane Tran for being our second guest speaker for the Community Conversation series. So thank you, Jane, for joining us today. We dropped her socials of where you can find her and where you could book her to cater your events. Jane is also located in Toronto too, so let's support each other.
Woo. Amazing. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.